Welcome to this edition of Handball on the topic of the mind and politics, where we will explore how psychological profiles influence political behavior. Our analysis will draw from the perspectives of three influential thinkers, Jordan B. Peterson, Niccolo Machiavelli, as well as Vilfredo Pareto. We begin with Jordan Peterson. Regardless of the controversial opinions around him or from him, our focus here is not to critique or endorse his political views. While Peterson's political stance has notable flaws, his background in psychology provides a useful and accessible framework for introducing these concepts we'll discuss. Peterson frequently addresses the psychological underpinnings of political alignment in his lectures and public talks. He identifies two fundamental poles in society, which he refers to as liberals and conservatives, and argues that these orientations are deeply rooted in distinct psychological traits. In essence, our political choices are closely tied to our personalities. In previous discussions, we examined spiritual castes and how each group's worldview influences political dynamics. However, we shift our focus to the psychological dimension, specifically the two core psychological profiles, so to speak, that shape political tendencies and voting behavior. According to Jordan Peterson, individuals he labels as liberals tend to be open, creative, and agreeable. They often drive societal change and are more likely to vote for left-leaning parties. In contrast, those he classifies as conservatives are typically more closed-minded, orderly, and conscientious, traits associated with maintaining social stability and aligning with right-wing politics. As noted earlier, Peterson's framework is not without significant bias and conceptual flaws. While his psychological insights are valuable, it's important to critically assess and adjust his political terminology to ensure clarity and accuracy. To begin with, liberalism is actually an ideological tradition. It's not really just a voting pattern or a psychological profile. In the liberal democratic world, most people, including conservatives, operate within a liberal framework. In many cases, so-called conservatives are just liberals who prefer to preserve a particular previous iteration of liberalism. For the sake of clarity in this discussion, we will therefore refer to the two psychological profiles as open-minded individuals and orderly individuals, rather than using the politically charged labels of liberal and conservative. Peterson often illustrates the roles of these two psychological profiles within an organizational setting. One of his well-known quotes encapsulates this idea: "Liberal creates companies, conservatives run them." Those with an open-minded personality tend to be innovative and creative, making them well-suited for entrepreneurial roles. However, due to their agreeable nature and aversion to conflict, they are typically less effective at enforcing structure and managing teams. Peterson often links personality traits to underlying biology. He suggests that high openness individuals might be more exploratory and less dominance-oriented, whereas conscientious or low agreeableness individuals are more prone to enforcing structural and social rules, traits necessary for managing people. These tasks align more naturally with orderly individuals. Those who thrive on structure are more comfortable with confrontation, excel at enforcing discipline. Picture like a strong manager, highly organized, unafraid of tough negotiations, capable of disciplining, reprimanding, or letting go of staff when necessary. But this orderliness often comes at the expense of creativity, limiting their ability to think outside the box or drive innovation. After all, creativity, if you think about it, is an inherently disruptive and destructive and chaotic attribute. It involves breaking down, carrying apart existing systems or beliefs to create new ones, right? And if you think back about your own experiences in the workplace, for example, in mine, company founders that I've met were often open-minded and kinder, whereas general managers or operations managers had a much more serious tone. They had to be more rigid, more strict. They had no hesitation in reprimanding staff when needed, enforcing boundaries, and so on. According to Peterson, open-minded individuals play a crucial role in society by driving necessary change, especially in a world that is constantly evolving. However, not all change is inherently good. This is where orderly individuals come in. The role is to regulate the pace of change and preserve the traditions and systems that continue to serve society well. On the other hand, if orderly individuals dominate political or organizational decision making, they can create stagnation, anchoring a society or company to a past framework when adaptation is essential for survival. This balance forms the foundation of Peterson's understanding of voting behaviors across societies. In his view, orderly individuals and open-minded individuals need each other. This interdependence is why he places such importance on open dialogue, freedom of expression, the moderation of extremes on both sides. However, one of Peterson's limitations is his tendency to frame these dynamics within a liberal democratic worldview. In reality, as many critics point out, mass voting doesn't drive societal change. Instead, electoral outcomes actually reflect interest and decisions of elite groups, which brings us to a similar conclusion from elite thinkers themselves. Let's talk about Machiavelli. If a political analysis does not operate from an elite perspective, it is everything but political analysis. Hand poll. To understand politics in a serious and precise way, it must be approached from the perspective of the elite, not from the viewpoint of the general public, because that's how politics works. But with this in mind, we turn to one of the foundational figures of the Italian school of elite theory, who is Niccolo Machiavelli himself. Machiavelli outlines the traits of an ideal ruler, most notably through the concept of virtù, while often translated as virtue. This term in the Machiavellian sense is closer to ambition, or what Plato described as the will to power. Those who possess virtù demonstrate both physical and mental strength, qualities that can be developed through discipline, such as warfare or fighting, overcoming personal struggles. And one more universal trait that Machiavelli attributes to successful leaders is deception. He writes extensively about rulers who maintain power through manipulation, strategic dishonesty, breaking treaties and agreements, and other forms of cunning. In the second book of Discourses, Machiavelli emphasizes that fraud is far more effective than brute strength in the pursuit of power and wealth. For him, the political arena is not governed by moral ideals, but by the tactical use of force, manipulation, and calculated ambition. As he says, "Indeed, I am of the opinion that no man has ever risen to greatness from average fortune through strength and generosity alone, whereas through deception, many have succeeded." This combination of deception and force in a successful politician is what Machiavelli describes as a ruler who imitates both the lion and the fox. In The Prince, he explains that the lion is vulnerable to traps, while the fox is vulnerable to wolves. Therefore, a ruler must be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten off the wolves. Those who possess only one of these traits without the other runs the risk of not lasting long in power. Finally, the Machiavellian statesman must be highly adaptable to the shifting nature of the times. Through his writings, Machiavelli emphasizes this critical quality. Neither cruelty nor compassion, boldness nor caution, generosity nor greed will guarantee success unless they align with the demands of the moment. The effective political actor is not defined by fixed moral traits, but by the ability to adjust his strategy as circumstances evolve. To elevate the discussion further, we now turn to Vilfredo Pareto, building on the ideas introduced by Machiavelli. Pareto, an Italian sociologist and economics, best known for the Pareto distribution, also made significant contributions to the Italian school of political thought. In particular, we'll explore concepts from his major work, The Mind and Society, originally titled Trattato di Sociologia Generale, focusing on what he called residues. Pareto's terminology can be somewhat unconventional and at times difficult to parse. When he speaks of residues, he's referring to universal patterns of behavior, actions, and modes of thinking, those that remain relatively stable across different civilizations and historical periods. These residues, according to Pareto, are tied to deep-seated sentiments or instincts that persist beneath the surface of rational discourse. Here's a rule of thumb for you. If a behavior is universal and unchanging across cultures, you can be pretty confident in assessing that that is a part of human nature. This is what residues are. So, class 1 residues, or instincts of combination. Class 1 residues refer to deep-rooted human impulses to combine, systematize, and manipulate elements, whether intellectually, practically, or symbolically. This includes practices such as numerology, magical rites, superstitions about luck, as well as more modern behaviors like founding, reorganizing, or merging companies and reshaping political institutions or ideologies. These residues are the psychological foundation behind the drive to create systems, whether logical or pseudo-logical, from theology and metaphysics to ideological movements. Although the residues themselves are universal and relatively constant across human societies, they give rise to specific and diverse cultural expressions, known in Pareto's terminology as derivations, which vary from one civilization to another. In other words, instincts are the same, but their expressions take on culturally unique forms. Class 2 residues, or group persistences. Once a particular combination or social arrangement is formed, another type of residue emerges to maintain it. These are Class 2 residues, the instincts of persistence and conservation, which Pareto saw not just in human societies, but also in the behavior of animals, what could be called social inertia. These residues manifest in all types of behavior and belief that treat family, nation, tribe, or religion as permanent, enduring realities, forces that transcend individual life. From ancestor worship and belief in immortality to, family pride, patriotism, religious fanaticism, class solidarity, these are all derivations rooted in the residue of group permanence. They are what drive the belief that a nation can be saved, that a bloodline is sacred, or there is one true faith. Though these ideas may be expressed rationally, the psychological root is affective and irrational. A primal loyalty to what already exists and must be preserved. It's important to note that residues are not the same as ideologies or cultural values. Those are called derivations. Residues are subconscious emotional tendencies, the invisible roots from which visible cultural and ideological expressions grow. They are not rational, though they often inspire the rationalizations and theories humans construct around them. There are more residues than those mentioned above. However, most of these are variations actually of Class 1 and Class 2 residues. So for now, we will limit ourselves to the study of these true residues or instincts. Machiavelli's aforementioned foxes are mainly influenced by Class 1 residues. They are based on combinations. In politics, they rule with creativity, fraud, deceit, and generally don't have a strong attachment to family, church, nation, or traditions. They live in the present and they are ready for change, novelty, adventure. In economics, they tend to speculate, innovate, are inventive, and do not have a great capacity to use force. Machiavellian lions are influenced mainly by Class 2 residues. They are conservative, patriotic, loyal to some tradition, and tied to groups such as family, church, or nation. Their main concern is posterity and the future. In economics, they are cautious, thrifty, and orthodox. They do not trust novelty and admire character and duty more than intelligence. Recently, the Western world is absolutely stunned, horrified, appalled by Russia's unimaginable violence in attacking the much smaller and vulnerable nation of Ukraine. While in the rest of the world, there are those who understand and even sympathize with Russia. How is this small aberration possible? After all, Putin is an irredeemable autocrat who uses violence and intimidation to crack down on his opposition and his enemies. While for Russia, on the other hand, the immeasurable dishonor and dishonesty of Ukraine and the West is incomprehensible. They have broken all kinds of pacts and agreements. They have constantly given their word to Putin. They have officially signed that they would have an armistice, a withdrawal of weapons from regions that they promised. They promised him they would not expand NATO, they would not include Soviet states in their organization, and after many years and decades of dishonor, dishonesty, fraud, and deceit to the Russian nation and its people, how is such an aberration possible? How can the West be so immoral? That's the other perspective. So these types of elites prevail in different political and historical contexts, and they explain the behavior of all types of organizations. Let's look at another two extreme examples from history. Vilfredo Pareto cites ancient Athens as an example of a state with class 1 residues in the elite and by extension the population. From here, we got the glory of Athens, its fortunes, its political and cultural contributions. With its great fleet, it established a commercial empire in the Mediterranean, great temples, statues, philosophers and poets who were honored for attacking the old and traditional ways of life. However, the foxes who ruled Athens did not manage to keep it in prosperity for long, as they constantly formed factionalism, made plots, organized betrayals and rebellions. They were not adept at surviving war. In other words, intelligence and creativity alone were not solid enough as a foundation for withstanding plague, war, defeat, crisis, hardship. In extreme contrast, you had Sparta, a nation where the residues of class 2 residues predominated in both the elite and the population. In Sparta, innovation was a crime. Everything was regulated by ancient customs and religion. The individual had no value and the group was everything. Adventure was always viewed with suspicion. From these roots came enormous resilience in the face of adversity. But Sparta never really achieved anything spectacular. It produced no philosophy or wealth, very little art, and despite carrying out glorious conquest in Peloponnnesia in the 4th century BC, the conditions of life and warfare changed considerably, and this is where Sparta succumbed. For lacking class 1 residues or open-minded people, it failed greatly when it came to adapting to the new environments. This is basically what Peterson tries to explain in many of his videos when he talks about conservatives versus liberals, but it's better and more accurate to illustrate it with Machiavelli and Pareto's arguments and expertise. And you? What examples do you have? How do foxes interact with lions in your country or in your work experience? You can type it in the comments below. Remember, I read all comments and try to reply to most of them. Thanks for watching this video.